Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رضي الله تعالى عنه وعن كافة المؤمنين. نعم. Okay, we are still in the introductory portion of this text. And let's begin as we are supposed to begin, as usual, with our intentions. Right? So, who would like to start us off with the English? Someone else do the Arabic, inshallah ta'ala. You've got your paper with you? See, everybody's taking out their folders and everything. Who wants to volunteer? Read. Don't tell me everybody came here without an intention. Without their intentions. Yes.
What page is it?
It's not in the book.
Oh, it's the handout that he gave.
It's not in the book.
Oh,
I handed it out the last class we were here, and I wanted everyone to learn it. There was Arabic, there was English. Hamza's got his. Okay.
that's actually mine. So
Oh, it's
we'll
actually
read the
Roger.
Arabic,
All right. Take us through the English, inshallah, and let's repeat together. And please bring your handouts with you. Bring your intentions to class with you. It's very important. All right. Yes.
You might bring in another copy next week.
I can bring copies next week, inshallah. Yes. Yes, Hamza. So you read out loud, and we'll all repeat after you. Bismillah ar-Rahman.
In the name of Allah,
In the name of Allah,
the All-Merciful,
the All-Merciful,
the Ever-Merciful.
the Ever-Merciful.
All praise is due to Allah,
All praise is due to Allah,
the Lord of the worlds.
the Lord of the worlds.
I intend learning and teaching,
I intend learning and teaching,
reminding myself and reminding others,
reminding myself and reminding others,
benefiting myself and benefiting others,
benefiting myself and benefiting others,
encouraging people to hold fast to the Book of Allah
encouraging people to hold fast to the Book of Allah
and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah.
and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah.
May Allah bless him and grant him peace.
May Allah bless him and grant him peace.
Calling people to guidance,
Calling people to guidance,
guiding people to good,
guiding people to good,
and in doing all this,
and in doing all this,
seeking the continence,
seeking the continence,
pleasure,
pleasure,
nearness,
nearness,
and the reward of Allah Most High.
and the reward of Allah Most High. Very good, very good. So I'll bring more copies next week, inshallah. Keep them, bring them to class with you. You can use them as bookmarks to keep in your book. This way you always have it with you. Remember, bring your intentions to class. Actually, bring your intentions everywhere, inshallah. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman. Page 21. So we have two more. Yes. Please. Two more chapters, and they're short, inshallah. Then we actually get into the meat of the lesson of the book. Page 21, chapter 3, the path and the laws of the heart. I encourage you also to read the footnotes at the end of this, the references also. You can read that during the week, inshallah ta'ala, but there's also useful information there. So whenever there's a footnote, you can look at it either in class or at home, inshallah. Know that there are two types of law, two types of laws. An outer law concerned with actions, and an inner law concerned with the human heart. So there are laws that govern the external world and the internal world. The outer law consists of rules pertaining to worship, i.e. ibadah, transactions, marriage, judicial rulings, and criminal law. The inner law, or tasawwuf, and the word tasawwuf is one of several different words that defines or that describes the inner law. If we, yeah, you can read the footnote at home, inshallah. But one of the names is tasawwuf, another name is tazkiyah, Tazkiyah, i.e. purification. Another term is zuhud. Zuhud, this term zuhud was used in the Prophet's time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, Ya Rasulullah, dullani ila amalin, direct me to an act that if I do it, Allah will love me and people will love me. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Izhad dunya yuhibbak Allah. Be zuhud in the dunya, right? Renounce the world is what the translation says. Be zuhud. Zuhud is to renounce something. Give up something. Give up, meaning to give up your attachments in the heart to something, right? So renounce the material world, renounce love and devotion and worship and attachment to the material world, and Allah will love you. وَإِزْهَدْ فِي مَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ يُحِبَّكَ النَّاسِ. And renounce chasing after what people have, and people will love you. Don't befriend somebody because of who they are or what they have, for example, the possessions they have, the connections they give you. Renounce those things, be zuhud, be a zahid of those things, and then people will love you. So zuhud as a concept was used during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and later on the term changed. The word tasawwuf developed later during the time of Imam Shafi'i radiyallahu ta'ala an. And then after that, the word tasawwuf, after that, then tazkiyah grew after that. And the word tazkiyah is actually in the Quran. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى, Allah ta'ala says, talking about the nafs, that the one who purifies and cleans the nafs will be successful. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ. The one who succeeds is the one who man tazakka, the one who does tazkiyah. Tazakiyah and tazkiyah is also related to the word zakat. Right, zakat. So zakat is the money you give, which purifies the money you keep, the money you don't give. So this purifies your savings. So it's in order to clean the money and purify the money that you have to take a portion of it and give it to those that are in need. So that portion that you extract, right? It's just like blood. It's just like when you have a toxin in your body, you have to take that out, remove that toxin, right? So the toxin for wealth, which renders your wealth impure, you take out a portion of that and you give it to the poor and the needy. That is called the zakat. So the zakat is the wealth that purifies your wealth, and it also allows that wealth which is pure to grow, because just like when a toxin is out of your body is not only pure and clean, but it can also grow and thrive because you've eliminated that waste. So zakat means purity, but it also means growth also. And so tazkiyah, purification, means purification of the heart, but growth and development of the heart as a result, as a byproduct of that process of purification. So all of these terms you see are synonymous. Purification of the heart is the translation of Arabic terms like tazkiyah, like tasawwuf, and like zahid. These terms are all synonymous, but they have different meanings and different focus. Okay. So here in the text here, the word tasawwuf is used. So the inner law, or zuhud, or tasawwuf, or tazkiyah, consists of rules pertaining to repentance from sins, the purging of contemptible, bad qualities, right? The purging of those qualities, the elimination of those qualities. Just like I mentioned, you take out the impure wealth to purify, you remove those bad qualities, you purge yourself of those bad qualities. Right? You take out the filth. The purging of contemptible qualities and evil traits of character. And after you take something out, after you remove something, you've got to replace it. So it is also the adornment of with virtues and good character and so forth. So these are the three basic concepts, if you will, that are the three basic ingredients or components of tazkiyah or tasawwuf or zuhud. One, repentance, constantly turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Two, purging yourself of bad, blameworthy qualities. And three, adorning yourself. The language of adornment is used. In other words, adopting good qualities, adorning yourself with good qualities, embellishing yourself, beautifying yourself with good character and good qualities. This is what's going on. And purifying the heart right? Purifying the soul just means removing those bad qualities from yourself and replacing them with good qualities. That's what it means. And so the science or the discipline of tasawwuf and tazkiyah is about how to do that, and not how to do it once or twice or 3 times, but how to do it consistently, so that those changes that you make are not intermittent changes but permanent changes. If it pleases Allah, here we will mention the means, the tools, and other things concerning how to implement this inner law. Know or understand that in this discipline, in this ilm, the science, because this is indeed a science, as in other disciplines, there are 10 foundational principles. So this is very interesting. We're going to, just for a second, take a step out of tasawwuf, and we're going to take a step into what's called Islamic epistemology, right? The science of what constitutes a science. If you ask someone today, just for half an hour, we're going to step out of tasawwuf for a second. We're going to go into Islamic knowledge. If you ask any professor today or anybody who's a scholar in the academic sense, you ask any sociologist, any economist, any social scientist, what is it that makes a discipline a science? Right? Why is economics a science and dance not a science? What is it that makes sociology a science and music or art or yoga not a science? If you were to ask someone, is sociology a science? They would say yes. But then if you were to say, is tafsir a science? Most people would say no. Someone who's trained in the Western modern tradition would not look at something like tafsir as a science, would not look at something like fiqh as a science. Right? Why? It's because the modern Western definition of what a science is it differs from what the Islamic traditional understanding of what a science is. In today's modern time, a science is a discipline that employs the scientific methodology as a means to discover and to bring out the information that constitutes that science. Right? So the scientific methodology is about anything that you can, that is based on the senses, basically, concrete senses, that if you can taste it and see it and smell it, if it is accessible through sense perception, then it is considered scientific. If it involves belief, for example, if it involves the accepting of information based upon divine revelation or some other standard, then it's not really termed scientific. So if the discipline is uprooted, if it is produced according to the norms of the scientific method, then that discipline is scientific, or it's a science. In the Islamic tradition, a discipline becomes a science if it has 10 components to it. If it does not have 10 components, it is not a science. And by science, we use the term ilm in our tradition. It's a Quranic term, actually, ilm. And so things are either an ilm in the Islamic tradition, a science, or it's not an ilm, it's an art called a fen. So you have ulum, sciences, ulum is the plural of ilm, you have ulum, sciences, and you have funun, arts. So for example, in the Islamic tradition, fiqh would be a science. Calligraphy would be a fen or funun, an art. Economics may or may not be a science, according to Islamic standards. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the discipline of tazkiyah and tasawwuf and spirituality, and we're going to determine if it's a science or not. And most definitely, according to our tradition, it is a science. But why is it a science? It's a science because it contains these 10 principles, these 10 foundational principles, which render it a science. If you can apply these 10 principles to a discipline, then that means it is a science in Islamic terms. If these 10 principles cannot be applied to a discipline, that means it is not a science in Islamic terms. So 1, he says, Know that in this discipline, as in other disciplines, there are 10 foundational principles. If these 10 are found there, then it's an ilm, it's a science. 1, its definition. So in order for something to be a science, a discipline, it has to have a definition. You have to be able to define what fiqh is. You have to be able to define what tafsir is, what tazki is, what economics is, what history is, what sociology is. There has to be a definition. 2, subject matter. After you have a definition, then what's the topic? What's the subject? What does it cover? 3, its fruits. So what's the point of the subject? What are the fruits that are born from, when you learn this subject, what do you get? What's called the thamarat. 4, its virtues. The virtues of that science, the good things that come about as a result of that science. Look at the thinking in the tradition. We're not just about discovering a scientific discipline just for the sake of knowledge. We want to know that that science that we've discovered, that we've produced, has an actual concrete virtue in the world. There has to be some positive point to that science. There has to be some production, some positive production that science contributes as it relates to the well-being of man and society. Its relationship to other disciplines. If you have this science, what's the point in having another one that's similar to it? What's its relationship? How does it connect in the overall epistemological framework of knowledge as a whole that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said He's revealed to the human being? Its sources. What are its masadir, or what's its masdar, its source, its asl? Where does it come from? Does it come from just your head? Does it come from divine revelation? Is it a combination of reason and revelation? Is it a combination of reason, revelation, and history? What are we dealing with? Because that informs us, or that gives an indication as to how much we can rely on the discipline. Okay. Yes.
So speaking of sources, what are the sources of these 10 principles? Where do these come from?
That comes, well, we learned that in Aqidah and Kalam, actually. So it's a long discussion, but this is from Aqidah, our epistemology. I mean, that's another class, to be honest with you. But the scholars of usul, what's called our usul, our foundational principles, have derived these 10 points as an extension of why do we rely on the Quran and the Hadith and reason, and what's their relationship. So the question about reason and revelation and the combination of that together, that discussion produced these 10 principles that are part of why or how we construct education and discipline and science in our tradition, and how we differentiate between that type of information and other types of information that are not constructed in that way. So it's part of our entire educational epistemological framework of what we accept as valid information, what we don't accept as valid information. It's a 1,200 plus year intellectual history that all of our scholars are a part of collectively. So it'll be a good PhD dissertation. I can give you more sources of reading of that, but I don't want to go into deep detail about it now. It's a very good question. There's entire books written on that. Miftah al-Ulum is one of the great works, which is 3 volumes about on this topic as well. Okay. The legal rulings relevant to it. So just because you have a discipline, you have a science, but what's the hukam? What's the legal judgment in Islam related to that science? Well, if the science that you're talking about is magic, there's one ruling related to the science of magic. If the science is poetry, then there's another ruling for the science of poetry. If the science is writing, for example, or if it is law, for example, there's a different ruling for it. There's a ruling for the science in general. Then there's another different ruling regarding learning that science. And there's another ruling regarding applying that science in the real world. In other words, you can learn about the science, that may be one ruling, but applying it might be a very different science. Right? So maybe you want to learn about the science to understand why it's haram. So learning about it in that case is not haram because you want to understand why it's haram. Right? So learning about it might not be haram, but applying it might be haram. So the ruling about it, learning about it might be one thing, but applying the discipline might be a very different ruling. So all of that is part of the episteme, as we call it. The rulings relevant to it, its scope. How far does it go? Right. What areas does it cover in its entirety? What are the limits to that science? Basically, its scope is its limits. What can it cover and what does it not cover? And its name, what's it called? And its basis. Okay. So now that we know generally, these 10 areas are what construct and what define a science in Islamic terms. Now let's apply this to the science of tasawwuf, tazkiyah, and see what we get. 1. Concerning its definition, the inner law is the science of the states of the lower self, i.e. the nafs. It's the science of the nafs. The nafs is the psychology, the heart, the spirit, the soul, sort of wrapped up into one in some instances. Okay, we're going to talk about the lower self. It's called lower because the seat, the center of it is in the stomach, as opposed to the mind. Okay, it's called the lower self. It's the science of the states, the different situations, the different colors, if you will, the different feelings, the different tendencies of the nafs. Whether it is praiseworthy or reprehensible, both its good states and its bad states are part of this discipline. The way of purifying it, of what is reprehensible, and adorning it instead with what is praiseworthy. That's the definition of tasawwuf. The subject is the deeds, the amal of the heart, in the perspective of cleansing and purifying. So in terms of the subject matter itself, we're talking about what are the actions that the heart does. Now this is very different because in our Islamic understanding, the body does actions, but so does the heart. The heart is an organ of movement and action. It's very important. So when you talk about limbs, body parts that are capable of action, the heart is one of them. And so these body parts that are capable of action, the reason that this is important is because the action of that body part renders you responsible for that action. So for example, the hand has an action. It can give, it can take. If you give something, it's called an action of the hand. The hand is you're attributed with that action, but the hand as a body part is recorded as the agent of the action, as opposed to your foot, right? The foot goes places. The hand gives, the hand takes. If the hand gives something good, then it's recorded in your favor. And on the day of judgment, remember in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you won't speak, your body parts will speak. So the hand will say, yes, I gave sadaqah today. Or, yes, I stole that money when nobody was looking from the masjid sadaqah box because I wanted that falafel. Or whatever. So that's the hand. The hand can also hit. It can also perpetrate violence. It can also defend and protect. Okay. The hand can stand up for justice, and it can perpetrate injustice. Okay. It can do darb in both sense of the word, both striking and avoiding. Same thing with the feet, but it's a different type of action. The feet takes you someplace. It can take you to haram, or it can move you away from haram. Actions of the body. Same thing with the tongue. Remember the Prophet ﷺ had his young student Mu'adh ibn Jabal riding with him. And Mu'adh was just a kid, and he said, young boy, I want to teach you something. Right. And so he said, know that anything you do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you to account about it. Right. And then after a long discussion, long advice the Prophet gave Mu'adh, he said, shall I tell you of the one thing that will control basically your destiny? I'm summarizing the hadith. And Mu'adh, he said, yes, Ya Rasulullah. He opened his mouth. The Prophet opened his mouth and he grabbed his tongue. He said, keep this tied. Hold that. Restrain this organ right here. And then Mu'adh, he said, "Oh, Ya Rasulullah, will we be taken into account by what we say?" And the Prophet ﷺ stopped and looked at him. He said, "Oh, Mu'adh," he said, "is there anything else on the Day of Judgment that topples people on their faces but what they say? Is there anything else that makes people fall on their faces on the Day of Judgment with regret and sadness except what that organ does?" Now on the Day of Judgment, that organ will be given the power to speak. Very interesting. That the concept, remember in Surah Al-Buruj in the Quran, وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ, Allah Ta'ala says about the Day of Judgment that there will be a witness and people and things that are witnessed. These witnesses on the Day of Judgment that testify about you and me and what we did is going to be our body parts. That's the ultimate witness, is ourself and the organs, right? So as it relates to tazkiyah, the focus of purifying the heart is to correct the actions of the heart. Why? Because if the heart is the center and the sultan of the body parts, if the heart is corrected, then all of the other limbs fall in place. But in the words of the Prophet, if the heart is diseased, well then you get body parts that are also diseased. So from a behavioral point of view, you want to get into behavioral psychology, and this is not a class on behavioral psychology, but one of the reasons why tazkiyah is called spiritual psychology is because it deals with certain psychological elements. And that is that from a behavioral point of view, from an Islamic behavioral point of view, if you want to change a person's behavior, you have to start from within, not without. You have to change the person's condition of the person's heart. Yes, the changing of the condition of the person's heart requires a certain external environment, yes. But the focus, the concentration has to start here. Okay. Has to start from the heart. Inna fi jasad al-mudgha, there is a piece of meat in the body. إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ الْكُلُّ. If that piece of meat is whole, then the whole body as a result is whole. وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّ. And if that piece of flesh is diseased and ill, as a result, consequently, the rest of the body parts will be ill. أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبِ, the Prophet ﷺ said. It is the heart. That piece is the heart. Okay? Just as a side note, the other limbs that also are attributed with action are the ears, the eyes, the stomach, and the genitals. Okay? There's 7 limbs total. You should memorize this. You really should memorize this. Easy. Start from the top. Eyes, ears, no, not your nose. Somebody said nose. Eyes, ears, tongue, stomach, hands, genitals, feet, and what controls them all is the heart. So, in the words of our teacher, imagine that all of these 7 that your body is a city, is a Medina. And to your Medina, in order to enter your Medina, there are 7 gates. There's the gate of the eyes, the gate of the tongue, the gate of the ears. There's 7 gates, just like there's 7 organs. And at each gate, there are guards, which allow for things to come in or prevent things from coming in. And the organ that controls these guards, which allows them to take a break, tells them, no, don't take a break, stay vigilant, is the heart. Okay? And so the heart is the sultan or the leader, the ruler of the Medina, of the city. Now the prophetic city is also called Medinatul Munawwara, the city of Nur, the city of light. And the heart is a place of Nur, place of light. And so the only way to keep that city lit is to enlighten it with good deeds. The more good deeds that you do, the more enlightened your city becomes. And the more sins, and not just sins, the more negligence, right? The more you ignore responsibilities, the more you intentionally, well, most people don't intentionally, but intentionally in a different aspect, I'll explain that later. the more you intentionally keep yourself busy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more darkness can ensue. But it's a gradual process. You don't feel it. Right? It's like hypertension. Right? You don't feel it. Just one day you just drop dead from a heart attack. Okay? So you have to be vigilant all the time. This is this discipline. This discipline is about concentrating on the ruler of the city, not the guards. Not the guards. Who cares about the guards when they take orders from the commander? It's about the commander. Okay, so the subject is the deeds of the heart as it relates to cleansing it and purifying it, concerning its fruits. They are the reformation and the restoration and the rectification of the hearts. Why? Because it is a given assumption in this discipline that not you and not just your neighbor, but everybody, we're all sick. This is a really profound paradigm that every single person, and this is very different from the Christian perspective, because from a Catholic perspective, there's a doctrine of original sin. We don't believe in a doctrine of original sin, but we do believe in the idea that our hearts are sick and they require tadawi. They require reform and medication. In other words, we believe that we are all walking, we're all in need of therapy, put it like that. And masjids are supposed to be places, masjids are essentially supposed to be centers of therapy. They really are. They're not supposed to be like citadels of power. Masajids are supposed to be places of shifa. Our teachers are supposed to be licensed practitioners in the rectification, the reformation of hearts, not opportunistic scholars for dollars. Okay. Everyone is under construction. We are all require therapeutic intervention. We are all outpatient. We're in outpatient therapy, essentially. And we all have open, ongoing cases. Nobody is better than the other. We're just at different stages of treatment. That's all. And some of us relapse quicker than others. And some of us relapse in public. Others of us relapse in private. Some of us relapse every week. Every Tuesday we relapse. Some of us like to relapse on Tuesdays because we know Fridays will be okay. Some of us relapse monthly. Some of us relapse when we are with a certain friend. Some of us relapse at a certain time on a Friday night. Right? But everybody relapse. And some of us are cognizant of that relapse and don't like it and want to go back into therapy and can't wait to get out of that, and we are traumatized by the persistent circle of relapse. And others of us are used to our relapses, and it becomes part of our genetics in a sense. It becomes part of our identity. We have constructed a new self. And others of us are traumatized that we even are being subject to relapses and are frightened of it and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change our condition. And so we are all dealing, we all of us have hearts that are sick. And how do we know this? Is that when we recite verses from the Quran, if we don't cry, we have a sick heart. Even in English. When we hear the Quran, if we don't move, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, Allah Ta'ala says the believers. He doesn't say Muslims. He doesn't say the Muslims. He said the believers. The mu'minun are الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. When the name of Allah is just mentioned, when you hear the name Allah, the believer's heart moves. That's what he says. Wajilat. Wajilat is to just tremble like this. Like the heart moves, your foundation moves. Wajilat qulubuhum. The qalb moves. Now the qalb is either soft and capable of movement, or it can be hard as a rock, stubborn, just solid. Wajilat qulubuhum. So if our hearts don't move, then we have to figure out why doesn't it move? What's going on that it's not moving? It doesn't move when we hear the name of Allah, But it moves when we see some romantic movie. It moves when we see something sad. But when we hear about our Creator, it doesn't move. The other sign of a diseased heart is the forgetfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll never forget my teacher, he said, you know, if you think about this point, he said, it's really powerful. He said, how can you forget the one who never forgets you? Right. I mean, think about that at a human level, just based upon a relationship. If you're in a relationship with somebody, that's your husband or your wife, and that person always thinks about you, or forget it, let's reverse it. You always think about them, and they never think of, like once a day they think about you? Once a week? Honey, did you think about me today? Oh, I forgot. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I love you. Life. Okay, I'm cooking your dinner. I'm paying the bills. I'm like taking out the trash. I'm ironing your clothes. I'm massaging you when you get, like, once you didn't, even on the train. You didn't think. No, there was that one time. Yeah, and it was how long? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. When we think about Allah, we pray the Lord. 2 minutes, 5 minutes. We think about Allah. Asr 5 minutes. Maghrib 3 minutes. Isha 3 minutes. Like, we don't give Allah 20 minutes in 24 hours. Like, that's traumatic. Think about how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you. Oxygen, food, opportunities, good weather, right? Protecting you from being in trauma. Right? Still every day your employers have money, so you're able to get a paycheck. Like, all kinds of stuff. You're protected from things. You can't see the victimization that's occurring in that building over there on the 15th floor. Like, you don't see that person getting hurt. It's a rahmah. Imagine if you could be all-seeing for one day. Just imagine that. Yeah, I'd be able to see my mom and everybody overseas, but you'd also see everybody who was murdered and killed and raped and traumatized all over the planet and victimized. That'd be trauma. You'd die. You couldn't take it. Right? Imagine being all-hearing. Right? Okay, if you're all-hearing, I mean, some people don't want to be 911 operators because they don't want to hear all the trauma all the time. They can't take the trauma. Right? So, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-seeing, all-hearing, always cognizant of us, but we, on the opposite, are all neglectful, all forgetful, all heedless. This is a sign of a sick heart. So it is out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gave us this discipline to rectify ourselves. And He put people on this planet to teach this discipline and to awaken us to our situation before it's too late. So the reformation of the heart is the fruit of this discipline. And gnosis, deep knowledge, of the one who knows the unseen worlds through tasting and finding, not through intellectual research. You want you want your teachers to explain to you the path because they have walked the path. Because they have learned from people who have walked the path. And that teacher has learned from people who have walked the path. And you want to learn in a consistent chain of people who have walked the path and know the path all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. That's what you don't want some intellectual who's read about the path. You don't want somebody who guesses. Like, would you go to a doctor who's just like read about hypertension? I think I've got high blood pressure. Yeah, well, I read in the encyclopedia, that this is how you treat it. And I'm sorry, I'll go to somebody else. No, we don't want people who have intellectual knowledge. You don't want knowledge about something. You want knowledge of something. Through tasting and finding. Tasting and finding are terms that indicate experience. Dhawq. Dhawq is the Arabic term for tasting. Dhawq means deep experience. Right? That's what you want. You don't want a novice. Right? You want somebody behind the wheel that has driven that car and driven that bus for 35, 40 years and driven that road for 35. You don't want somebody who just got their license today. So, oh God, you don't want that. No, and has never been down the path before. That's not for you. That's for somebody else. You let somebody else follow it. And another fruit of this science is success in gaining the pleasure of Allah. Like, this is very powerful. Just the pleasure of Allah is enough for anybody. Remember, it's not about how much you love Allah. It's about how much He loves you. You can love Allah all day and all night. If He's angry with you, it doesn't matter. So the pleasure of Allah is in the Quran mentioned as one of the biggest delights. وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Allah Ta'ala talks about the people in the garden, they have pleasure from Allah. This is a delight in and of itself. And attaining eternal happiness and purification of the heart in such a way that things to which the eyes of others are blind become clear and obvious. Concerning its virtues, the superiority of this science and its great esteem among all seekers is due to its concern with the gnosis, the deep knowledge, intimate knowledge of Allah Most High and love of Him. So if you've got a science that deals with love of Allah, then what's the rank of that science compared to other sciences that deal with the world? What do you think that level is? It's much higher than those sciences. So that's its virtue. Yeah.
What's the proper understanding of the relationship between the lower self and the heart?
Ah, very good question. They are two different entities. The nafs is one entity, and the qalb, we use the word qalb, is a separate entity. So it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not as if, it's in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put two different faculties inside of the human being. One faculty is the faculty of the nafs, the lower self. And the second is the faculty of the heart, which sometimes is called the soul, the ruh. Ruh or qalb. Different books use different terms. Here, the word qalb is used, the heart. And so the relationship between those two is that they are paradigmatically, they are diametrically opposed to each other. So the heart reaches upward, the nafs reaches lower, right? So they are diametrically opposed. So there's two opposite tensions, right? Two forces that are pulling the human being in opposite directions at different times, sometimes at the same time, right? So by reaching up, I mean that the heart is a faculty that by its nature, it is constructed to engineer and to pull the human being against the gravitational forces of the nafs. In other words, it wants to pull the human being upward to angelic qualities, to beautiful qualities, to divine qualities, to praiseworthy qualities. Whereas the nafs as a faculty is engineered to first pull the human being down to more bestial qualities, to more blameworthy qualities, right? That's what I mean by down. So, and this is also in the Quran that Allah Ta'ala says that we've created the human being fi ahsan taqweem, in the best of fashions. He's got the human being has this ruh, this quality, this qalb that renders the human being capable of transcending not only human qualities but angelic ones as well. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ, but because of this nafs and the human being's following of the nafs, this pulls the human being down to even the level below animals, right? To the lowest of the low. So the relationship is that they're opposite forces, and the business of tazkiyah is about not pulling the nafs to yours. It's not a tug of war that's going on, but it's in weaning the nafs off of going in that direction and getting it used to going in the other direction. It's not to pull it completely in your direction, it's to wean it to make a U-turn and to get used to making a U-turn as opposed to going down. Okay? Yes?
Would you say that the nafs and the ego are pretty
Yes.
in line?
Yes. Yeah. But ego is a Freudian psychological term. There are similarities and there are differences to that as well. But yes, absolutely. In general, yes. Okay. Concerning its relationship to other disciplines, the science is the basis for all others. The science of tazkiyah and purifying the heart is the basis for all other disciplines. What do they mean by that? Hold on, we'll come back. And the prerequisite for them, because there is no knowledge or good deed except with sincerity. and complete single-mindedness in seeking Allah over all else. So its relationship to other disciplines is like the relationship of the soul to the body. In other words, the body cannot exist without the soul. It is the soul that gives the body life. It is the soul that gives the body movement. It is the soul that gives the body value. It is the soul that gives the body importance, in a sense, right? Similarly, if you were to look at your good deeds as a body, right? If you were to take the analogy of the metaphor of every act you do as a body, right? So when you make salat, imagine that you are making a body, creating a body. I'm just using that as an example, right? So what is the soul to that thing? If you want to give that thing life, what is the agent that gives it life? What is the agent that gives your ibadah value so that Allah will accept it? It's sincerity, ikhlas, sincerity. Because the good deeds that you perform have no value if you haven't done them only to please Allah. Right? That's sincerity. So the value of every act you do is based upon sincerity. If you were to purchase this book only because everybody else in the room purchased it, and you wanted to just be like everyone else, I'm sorry, you just spent $20 and it didn't go anywhere for your akhirah. But if your action, your deed of purchasing, your deed of giving that money was to reach Allah, some way to get closer to Allah, then that act of purchasing is analogous to a soul entering the body and giving it life. That action just became a living organism in a sense. Okay? So this is what he means. And so what is it that produces sincerity in every action? It's the heart being alive. And so this discipline is a discipline that revives the heart. That's its relationship to other disciplines. You can talk about Islamic law all you want, and tafsir and Quran and actions all you want, but if you're doing all those things and you're not sincere, then there's a big problem there. Okay? So this is what he's explaining. So there is no knowledge or good deed except with sincerity. Yani there is no knowledge that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no good deed that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except without sincerity. Think of sincerity as the postage and the address. Okay. Concerning its founder, who is the inventor of this science, it is Allah, mighty and majestic, who established this science. He bestowed it through inspiration to his prophet, his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to the prophets before him, peace be upon them all. As such, it is the soul of all laws and religion. Very important, very powerful statement. You should underline that. It is the soul of all laws and all religion. Okay. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam this discipline through Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet ﷺ was made ready for it in a way that other Sahabas were not made ready, because we know of events where his heart was actually washed through the angels. But then, when the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, he spent 3 nights in the cave. Does everyone remember this story? And who did he spend those 3 nights with? Who accompanied him? Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an. And so, while they were in the cave, the Prophet ﷺ introduced this teaching to Abu Bakr. So Abu Bakr was the first Sahaba to actively receive the teachings of the science of the purification of the heart from the Prophet ﷺ. And this is mentioned in the Quran. Its dalil is in the Quran, actually. Because remember the story when Abu Bakr was closing the holes in the cave to make sure that there were no snakes and animals would come into the cave to attack the Prophet ﷺ and to harm them. And they heard the footsteps of the Quraysh, right, coming up the mountain looking for them. They heard the voices. And the Quraysh look in the cave, or they see the cave, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had caused a bird to create a nest and to lay eggs at the entrance of the cave, and he caused a spider to spin a web in the entrance of the cave. And the Quraysh had seen that, and they said, obviously no one's in the cave, because had someone gone in the cave, they would have disturbed the bird and the eggs, and they would have disturbed the spider's web. But during that moment, Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala was under a lot of anxiety, and he was concerned that the Quraysh would find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had perceived his anxiety. And so the Prophet ﷺ told Abu Bakr, Ya Abu Bakr, La takhaf, don't fear. And the verse of the Quran that references is the same thing that the Prophet said, Inna Allah ma'ana. Indeed, Allah is with us. Allah says that quotes that in the Quran. If you ever want to ask somebody a trick question, ask them which hadith is mentioned as a verse in the Quran. Nobody will ever get that. They'll say, what? Sorry, what? Hadith is narrated after. No, there's one hadith that's an ayat in the Quran. Inna Allah ma'ana. Indeed, Allah is with us. And what the Prophet ﷺ taught Abu Bakr over that 3-day period was the understanding of what's called ma'iyah, being with Allah. You're with people all the time. And we always are cognizant of the fact that we are with people. But because of our awareness and active awareness that we are with people, it produces a negative effect in that we forget that we are with Allah. That is the human condition. And what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching Abu Bakr was to come out of that human condition. The norm is that when you are with people, you feel secure. But the Prophet ﷺ was telling him that you shouldn't feel secure with people if that security or that feeling of being with the people renders you ignorant and heedless of the fact that Allah is with you and you're with Allah. What good is being with people if you're not with Allah? What's the point? Why do you want to be with people and be away from Allah? Your being with people should be a byproduct of your being with Allah. Because people are, in general, a ni'mah, a blessing. And so the Prophet ﷺ taught him, he was the first Sahaba to receive the teachings of Tazkiyah. And then from that, Sayyidina Abu Bakr taught Ali. And then Sayyidina Umar. And then from there it passed on to great Sahabas like Salman al-Farisi, like Bilal al-Habashi. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ also would teach this discipline to his wives. And he taught wives different perspectives of this discipline. And he taught each Sahaba, because the Sahabas had different, obviously, personalities, different traits. He taught them little differences in the approaches to this discipline. And at the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he would say, My ashab, inna ashabi ken nujum. My Sahabas are like stars in the sky. Any one of them you follow, you will be guided. Any one of them you follow, you will be guided. And so and in another narration is that the ways to Allah, the paths to reach Allah, are as numerous as the breaths that people take. Right. So there are different ways to reach Allah. Some of them quicker than others, some of them longer than others, some of them more arduous than others, some of them more practical than others in a different context, in a different environment, different condition. Some of them more tailored to the needs of certain people that act a certain way, that think a certain way, etc. And so the founder is Allah, then he taught the Prophet ﷺ, and then it was passed to the Ummah up until today. You have different people that have been taught different approaches to Tazkiyah. That's why you have different kinds of books which emphasize different things. Concerning its source, they are the book, i.e. the Quran, the prophetic example, because the Sunnah is the Quran in practice, a walking Quran. You cannot disassociate the two. And the authentic reports of the righteous folk who came after them. So the authentic reports and the narrations about the salihun, the righteous men and women who described this path, who transmitted this path, their sources as well. Concerning legal rulings relevant to it, to follow the inner law is personally obligatory upon every Muslim, because none except the prophets are free from the defects and sicknesses of the heart. Now let me explain this. it is personally fard. Let me say that again. It is an obligation. It is personally fard. It is an obligation on every single Muslim to do whatever is in their capability to try to improve their spiritual condition, to try to improve their heart and to improve their relationship between them and Allah. I'll say it again, and Allah is my witness. It is a personal obligation. It is not sunnah. It is a fard, a wajib. Whether or not you need a teacher is a second thing. Whether or not you need a sheikh or a sheikh is a second question, separate from the first. You are obliged to read, to learn, to seek out information, to ask questions, to change. Yes. Whether or not that obligation then extends to you having a sheikh or sheikha, is it then an obligation for you to have a teacher? That's a different situation. If you are the type of person that you need a teacher in order to follow instructions, in other words, you go to a doctor, all right, let's say you have a physical condition and there's information on online about the prescription. Right? You can just follow let's say you can follow the diet. Right? You can change your condition through diet and exercise and lifestyle changes. If you're the type of person that has the self-discipline within you to follow those written instructions and you don't need supervision, then you are completely fine and you just follow those instructions and you're not liable for not having a teacher or not working under supervision. But if you know that you're the type of person that you won't do it without supervision because you don't know how to start, or you don't know, you have questions and you want to know the answers to certain things, or you might start off energetic but then you'll taper off and you'll leave it. You know, without instruction, without a system, without an organization, without structure, you won't succeed, then you are bound to have a teacher and a sheikh. All right? So it depends on your individual situation whether or not it's obligatory for you to find a teacher or not. If you do not need a teacher, then you're not bound to follow a teacher. But if you need a teacher, then yes, you are bound to follow a teacher. Okay? So that's the secondary issue. So the legal rulings is that it is personally obligatory on every Muslim to learn this science as much as they can. Because no one except prophets are free from sick hearts. Okay? That's why. And also because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, there's a Quranic verse about this too, that استعيذ بالله فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون. Ask those who know if you don't know. Ask Ahl al-Dhikr, literally it says Ahl al-Dhikr, the people of dhikr, the people of remembrance of Allah. Fas'alu Ahl al-Dhikr. Ask the people of dhikr, the people who remember Allah, in kuntum la ta'lamun, if you don't know Allah. So ask them, consult them, go to them. I was telling you a story, I was in Syria in 1998. I was in Damascus, and I was with my brother-in-law, and there's this restaurant, there's a little cafe, and there's this other guy, he was studying, we were all students, and my brother-in-law was more advanced than I was in Arabic and everything. He had started first, and because of him, he and my sister, I traveled to Syria. So we were at this cafe, and this guy, he was a new student. My brother-in-law, his name was Jamal. Jamal was trying to explain to the other guy that everything's in the Quran. Right? If you have questions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it so that everything's in the Quran, one way or the other. And the guy was like, no, man, everything's in the Quran? Like, give me a break, man. Like, nothing, not everything's in the Quran. Everything? And Jamal was like, everything is in the Quran, akhi. Like, everything. You know. And so the waiter comes out and like he brings some baklava or a little dessert or something. I forget what it was. And the guy, he says, you mean to tell me the ingredients to this cake here are in the Quran, brother? You mean to tell, like, everything, like this cake, like how to make this cake? And Jamal, he said, yes, akhi. The ingredients for this cake are in the Quran. He said, no, man, give me a break. Akhi, come on, be serious, brother. you know? So he says, bro, the ingredients in this cake. And I was like, Jamal, you sure about that? Really? Like, I read a little Quran. I've done some tajweed. I never came across, you know, wafi baklava. You know, it's halib and jubn and stuff, and sukkar, yani. Never saw that in the ayat. What's that chapter called? Like, ta'arif al-ta'am or something? No. And so he said, yes. He said, I'll prove it to you. He said, okay, you got to prove it to me. So the waiter comes back, and Jamal, he says, can you bring the chef out? The guy who cooks, he says, sure, akhi, brother, yours. So he brings the chef from the back room, and Jamal, he says, can you tell me what's in this cake here? And the chef, he says, well, I put some of this, brother, and I put this and this, that, and we cook it like this. I hope you like it. He said, yeah, it's good. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. And the chef goes back, and the guy, he says, no. You said it's in the Quran. And Jamal said, I proved it, because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, if you don't know, ask those who know. If you don't know, ask those who know. Yani, everything's in the Quran, some specific, some general. Sayyidina Ali, he used to say, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, if I lost my camel, I could find it in the Quran. Yani, everything is in the Quran. Even like bad stuff. There's ways for weird people, sick people, to find sick and twisted stuff in the Quran. Like they could twist ayats to mean whatever they want it to mean. This is called ideology. Right? Take it from the Quran and you twist it. You can find it in the Quran. If you're a good-hearted person, you can find it in the Quran. If you're a fasik and munafiq and this person, the bad person, I'm sure you can find it in the Quran. And you can twist it that way. Quran is like that. Right? And so, the source for everything is the Quran. But some people are able to read the Quran and say, subhanAllah, that ayat is deep, it makes sense, I'm going to apply that, and they apply it. And a part of their life is reformed because they applied that ayat. Right? Somebody asked the companion, Abdullah, who's the son of Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, they said, how long did, this guy was memorizing Surah Al-Baqarah, he memorized, and Abdullah ibn Umar, he said, subhanAllah, he said, it took me 8 years to memorize Baqarah. And the guy said, 8 years? Right? He said, yes, because when we memorized, memorization meant practice. It wasn't about like rote memory. It meant you put it here and it went out in your bodies. It went out those 7 gates. And that's what memorization is. And that's why a person who memorized the Quran was called Hafiz. Because they really guarded and protected the Quran by preserving it in the community. You saw it walking. And so a Hafiz was someone who walked the Quran. And so people, Hufaz, were walking Qurans. That's what it was. Which is why when the Hufaz were killed in many numbers, Abu Bakr and Umar decided to document the Quran and have it written down, transcribed. Because the walking Qurans were dead and you couldn't see it anymore. Now in modernity, Hafiz means you put it here and they don't know they don't even understand it up here. Forget practice. Forget practice. So everything is in the Quran. So if you can practice it by yourself, if you can put it in here and let it come out those 7 gates, you don't need a teacher. Fine. But if it goes up here and it gets confused up here and it stays up here, and you need a teacher. And that's what's being said. Concerning its scope, the questions addressed by this science pertain to the attributes of the heart, interpreted and described through the terminology current among the people who put it into practice. So yes, there's different terminologies for different things, and we'll learn about those terminology. I gave an example by the word dhawq, taste. Dhawq or taste means experience. Terms such as detachment, pious caution, love, detachment, zuhd, pious caution, wara, love, which is mahabba, annihilation, which is fana, permanence, which is baqa, and so forth. We'll explain these later. They'll come. Concerning its name and basis, its name is the science of self-purification, yani tasawwuf, or the science of moral character, tazkiyah, or the science, or the inner fiqh, the inner jurisprudence, yani fiqh batin, the inner fiqh. And no matter your approach, remember I said there's different approaches, different techniques. But all of the approaches have 5 principles. So these 5 principles we're about to enumerate are common across the board. No matter what teacher you have, no matter what book you read, all 5 of these 5 principles are going to be there embedded somewhere. This is the commonality or the unicity in the diversity. First, taqwa, which is wariness of Allah secretly and open. Taqwa, both in private and in public. And this is realized, this becomes developed through pious caution and steadfastness. Pious caution is the translation of an Arabic term called wara. We'll talk about that later. I'm just introducing it now. Don't worry about it if you don't get it now. We'll deal with it, inshallah. I'll come to it. Pious caution. Pious caution as a term generally means you stay away from something halal because you're afraid it might take you into haram. That's why. There's certain things that are like that. Normally people have the idea that everything halal is fine. Well, it's true surfacely, but the shaitan exists also. And there are certain things that are halal, but they can metamorph or morph into something haram. And you see it, or your teacher sees it, and they say, stay away from that. And you say, well, wait a minute, it's halal. Yes, but it's halal. The first step is halal. The second step is a little less halal. By the time you hit the third and fourth step, you're tumbling down the rabbit's hole. Pious caution is taqwa in the halal. You understand what I'm saying? Like, taqwa is staying away from haram, right? That's taqwa. That's taqwa. But what happens if you stay away from something halal because it can lead to haram? That's not called taqwa anymore. Taqwa is when you stay away from haram stuff. Sometimes you have to stay away from good things because, like, think of a health level, right? Maybe your doctor tells you, well, because of your illness, you can't have sugar anymore. Well, sugar is normally halal, but you've got to stay away from it because it can take you to haram. Yani, it can take you to the point where you're damaging yourself. Okay? So that's not called taqwa. You don't say, I have taqwa from sugar. No, you have taqwa from alcohol. You have taqwa from haram things. You don't have taqwa from eating too much red meat. That's not taqwa. That's called wara, pious caution. Okay? So that's a concept for purifying the heart. Steadfastness, istiqamah. Right? Istiqamah, steadfastness. Steadfastness is a concept which teaches you how to be consistent in your good deeds, not to just do it once or twice. So taqwa and wara are the first. Second, following the sunnah. Any path you take. If you come up to a teacher and they tell you, you know, you don't need to follow the Prophet, you say, thank you very much, I hope you have a good day, and leave. This business about not following hadith, not following the Prophet, is the most dangerous thing since weapons of mass destruction. It will destroy you. There's no way you can be a Muslim and ignore the Sunnah and the Hadith. No way. Forget it. It does not exist. Not in this world. Maybe in another dimension. Not here. So every path is realized through the example of the Prophet. Yani, if we don't have the Prophet as an example, I mean, if we could do it ourselves, why would Allah send the Prophet? Who himself spoke Arabic to his companions who spoke Arabic, talking from an Arabic book. Yani, if anybody could logically figure it out, the Sahabas could when they're dealing with a book in their same language. It's not about linguistics. It's about a practice. Okay? So the Prophet practiced the Quran in a certain way. And it is that practice that reforms the heart. Okay?
Just
Yeah.
so based on that, the earlier point that you made that you have to find a teacher if you can't apply it, does that mean that we all need teachers if just by the basis of our listening prophets?
Yes, absolutely. Everyone needs teachers for general things, but in the specifics you may or may not need a teacher. So the specific was to bring the book down and to describe the book in its totality. But then there may be specific details about a person's life that require a teacher, and then there may be specific things that the person is good at themselves and they can just reform themselves on it, and they may not require a teacher. Well, there's some things in the Sunnah, or there's some, I don't want what I said to be, there's some hadith which require interpretation. There's some hadith and there's some instances in the Sunnah that are historicized, that are contextualized. Yes, that exists, okay? But as a general rule, there's no such thing as completely abandoning the Sunnah and trashing the hadith. That does not exist. That's the wrong way, yeah.
When it says in Quran, what you him, is that about
Yeah.
like the whole process of Islam as a whole, or is that about tazkiyah?
No, it's
specifically?
tazkiyah specifically. Yeah, the whole process of Islam is also, that's a very good point you mentioned, because that verse which explains why the Prophet was sent, what he was doing, is always dualized. It's always وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. It's always, the verse says, يُزَكِّيهِمْ, you're sent to purify them, tazkiyah, teach them purity. And وَيُعَلِّمُهُمْ, and to teach them, to educate them, the kitab, the book, wal-hikmah. Hikmah here, what does hikmah mean? Not in this case. It does not mean wisdom. No. Not law either. Sunnah. The way to understand the book. Teach the book and teach the way to understand it. That's the sunnah. That's the hikmah. Everybody's free to read the Quran and to develop, to ponder upon the Quran. But when it comes to societal implications of the Quran, there is a hikmah about it. There is a way it's supposed to be applied at the communal level. Yes, you're free to do, you can do what you want individually, and that's between you and Allah. But at the societal and communal level, there is a hikmah, there's a way to teach the book. And this verse of the Quran is plentiful. Allah Ta'ala says, we sent you to yuzakkihim, to do tazkiyah on them. Right? And yu'allimuhum, to teach them. Al-kitab wal-hikmah. Yu'allimuhum al-kitab wal-hikmah. To teach them the kitab and the hikmah. To teach them the Quran and the way to use the Quran. The way to apply the Quran. Right? So that they don't become extremists with this book. That's why you need the sunnah. Otherwise, you might go as a society and a community in divergent directions. Okay. So the sunnah, 3, turning away from creation, and most specifically the people of ghafla. Turning away from creation means you turn away from creation as it relates to a focus and a need. Okay? So you realize that the creation as a whole, that your need is not connected to people. Your focus should not be people. Your need and your focus should be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And your relationship to the creation should be determined and should be modeled and should be informed through your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the reverse. Turning away from heedless people means you don't become a person who, because of your relationship with people, now you develop a relationship with Allah. No, you turn away from people, you focus on Allah, and then your relationship with people follows as a result. Yani, if you turn in the direction of one thing, that means you've turned away from something else. If your focus and your concentration and your direction is the public, is the community, is the society, then you've turned your back on the standards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you've got to reorient yourself, okay, and focus on Allah, and then your relationship to the people will come through that lens. This is a very deep concept, a very extensive concept. We'll cover it when we come to it. I'm just introducing it now. Turning away from creation, and most especially the people of heedlessness, called ghafla, in equal measure meaning what? Whether they draw near appreciatively or flee from one in disdain. Yani, the way you treat people, how good you are, how polite you are to people, should not be based upon how they treat you. If the way you treat somebody is based 100% on how they treat you, you have work to do. Whether somebody praises you or whether they blame you should be of no consequence when it comes to how you treat them, if you are oriented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you're fully oriented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the person that has praised you, you see it in a certain way. You don't see it as praise in you. Okay? And the person, because you haven't done any, or you couldn't have done that act were it not for Allah Ta'ala's blessing. So you accept the praise, but you don't internalize it as if you've done something. And the person that blames you, you don't censure them and as if they've blamed something bad in you. You see that also through the perspective of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For Sayyidina Umar used to say, my best friend is not the person who tells me that I'm doing the right thing all the time. My best friend is the one who criticizes me all the time and finds fault in everything I'm doing so that I have an opportunity to correct myself now. So you see these things as opportunities and symbols and signals from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Both the good and the bad. This comes from our iman. Both good and bad are from Allah. That's the point. Good and bad. Qadr is good and bad. But they're all from the source, from Allah. So if you're looking at the things that extend from the source, if you're looking at creation, and you're focused on creation, then you forget the source. And then you start to assign value to the creation. And you start to focus on the creation. And then you get caught up and wrapped up in the creation. And this distracts you from the Creator. But if you're able to look at those things and keep your eye on the ball, as we say, on the source, then you always see everything in creation as an extension from the source. And if good and bad are really from one source, then you're able to see both good and bad through one lens. And it's a very different perception. Very different, yes.
Is there an adab, for example, when it comes to dealing with people of ghafla, without...
There is. We'll come to that.
Okay.
We'll come to it. We're just introducing it now. Yeah.
Can you give an example of when someone praises you, what you should think, and if someone criticizes you, what you should think? Like how do you
Yeah. Both of them are from Allah. In the praise aspect, you reference it to Allah by saying that, if somebody says, oh, thank you, you had a beautiful recitation, right? First thing that comes out of your mouth is, Alhamdulillah, this is a gift from Allah. Like, you don't think to yourself, oh, thank you very much, and it's because of my training and this, that, and I have this beautiful characteristic. Allah gave me a talent and I'm using. Like, no, you don't internalize it as if you've done something. Remember, the madhab of shaitan is I. Right? That's the madhab of shaitan. The moment you go into the I, you've left him. Right? So you don't internalize it. And the same thing with blame, actually. With blame, though, it's different. You still reference Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you reference Allah ta'ala by saying, if somebody says, you know what, I've got to sit you down, you're not responsible with your money, you do this, that, and the other, or you spend too much time doing this, that, and the other, that is also from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Allah ta'ala informing you of something that you need to correct. Now, there might be circumstances where the person is wrong, for example, like maybe their perspective is wrong. Maybe they interpreted what you did in the wrong way. That's also the same situation. What you do is, you say, this is a test from Allah and give me an opportunity to deal with this person. So you still don't take it personally. Also, just like the good thing, you don't take it personally. There are always opportunities to improve yourself. Does that make sense? So you never take it personally. Try not to take it personally. The bad things, you don't take it personally. You don't start becoming depressed and down because you were informed about, you were criticized at some point. And even the good things, you don't take them personally by letting that be an opportunity for arrogance and pride to develop either. And we'll come to this a little bit later, but just to touch on that point. Okay. So how do you get to this level? This is realized through patience and complete tawakkul. Not partial tawakkul, not 65% tawakkul, not 89% tawakkul, 100% tawakkul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? We'll come to that, inshallah. Fourth, finding pleasure with Allah in scarcity as well as abundance. Yeah, this is so tough sometimes for some people, but it's easy for those people that Allah Ta'ala wills for it to be easy for. That if you are here and you're here, it doesn't change the degree of contentment and pleasure you have with Allah. It's really, 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 it's a different state to be in. The only way you get like that is to focus on Allah always as your reference point. You have to see that there's a blessing for you and an opportunity and a chance for you in being up here. There's also a chance for you in being down here. There's an opportunity here. And there's blessings there. When trauma happens, when things are taken from you, both when things are given to you and when Allah takes things from you, in both are opportunities. Okay? That does not delegitimize sadness. That does not discount somebody or disqualify the mu'min from crying, from being sad, from being hurt. That's a separate issue. That's not what we're talking about. We're not saying when things are taken, when Allah has given you a loss, that you're not allowed to cry, and that's in some way, an attack on your spirituality. No, that is not the case. Crying is a spiritual mechanism. Sadness is a spiritual mechanism. But sadness in the right way, crying in the right manner, with the right frame of mind, is very different from crying and sadness in a very different frame of mind. Okay? We'll talk about that later. But keeping that focus, keeping the perspective that Allah is in charge, and whether you're up here or whether you're down here, does not matter in the overall system of Allah Ta'ala wanting good for you. Right? Now, that does not delegitimize people's trauma and experiences. But the spiritual path is about teaching us to have a different perception and a different perspective so that we can develop our hearts. Okay. Who had a question? Yes.
Is being up here or down here, is that in reference to material wealth or in like spiritual growth?
Everything. Sadness, happiness and sadness, wealth, poverty, sick, health and sickness as well. Age and youth, being old and being young, absolutely. Fourth, so we're still in the fourth one, and this is realize, let's start from the beginning, finding pleasure with Allah Most High in scarcity as well as abundance, and this is realized by contentment and deferring the outcome of every affair to the decision of Allah. Contentment is a hard thing in many cases, especially when we're used to a certain outcome. Fifth, turning to Allah in fortunate times and distressful ones. In both situations, now whether you're up here or whether you're down here, in both circumstances, you're supposed to turn to Allah. A lot of people, Allah criticizes people in the Quran that when they're at the bottom, when they're down here, then they decide to turn to Allah. Or when they're up here, they're ever forgetful of Allah. That is what Allah Ta'ala doesn't like. Any knucklehead can call on Allah when they're in the hospital. How many people can call on Allah when everything's perfect and good? What are you calling Allah for? Why would you pray to Allah when you have everything? Why? That's what we're going to discuss.
Did the Pharaoh call on Allah when he was drowning?
When he was drowning, right at the end, and Allah said, it's not acceptable. Not acceptable. That's a Pharaonic madhab. To only call on Allah when you need Him. Like, how many of us at the human level would love to associate ourselves with somebody who only called us when they needed something? No one. Like, no one would want that. Oh, you only... Assalamu alaikum, Sister Aisha. How you doing? Girl, I need something from you. Husna, every time you call me, you need something. How am I doing? Okay. Then you call them. Oh, Sister, I can't help you, Brother so-and-so, what's up? I haven't seen you in a long time. Brother, it's a good thing I ran into you. You know what? I had this situation. Can I talk to you for a second? No, brother. Not today. At the human level, we don't like people like that. So we should take that lesson and apply it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we as weak human beings don't like that, how is it with Allah? We can't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be pleased with us when we have that same behavior and attitude with Allah. We only remember Him when we need something. But yet on top of that, He still gives. SubhanAllah. People all over the world, they only call on Allah when they're in need, especially Americans. No, really, because people in other countries, they understand like trauma, and they understand living in patience, and they understand contentment. They understand these things very well. There was somebody who said that when Hurricane Sandy occurred, Americans became like everyone else in the world. Like they realized what it's like to lose something. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so we have to understand that the blessings we have are from Allah, and when we have blessings, we should continually turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in gratitude for those blessings, and we should share those blessings with as many people as we can. Concerning the bounties that Allah gives you, share them. Share them. And when we don't have, We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for not making our situations worse than it already is. And we are patient until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up a door for our situation to change. And even when we are down, we still give. See, the paradigm doesn't change. Matter of fact, giving when you're down is a way for that door to open. This is why the advice of the mashayikh and all of the teachers during the hurricane and during trauma was for, and during the economy also, the scholars were telling the Muslims, give. That's what they were telling them. Give sadaqah. You want to get out of trauma? Give charity. That's the fastest way to exit a traumatic situation. Give. You give, Allah loves giving. Give and then make a dua. If you have nothing to give, send salawats on the Prophet ﷺ. Like that's sadaqah. You don't have to give money. Right? The poor people, they said, Ya Rasulullah, the wealthy people are leaving with all the good deeds. They're giving all the money and we don't have anything. The Prophet ﷺ said, don't you have some sadaqah to give? Every subhanallah you do is a sadaqah. Every alhamdulillah you do is a sadaqah. Every la ilaha illallah is a sadaqah. To smile at a believer is a sadaqah. To take something out of the road is a sadaqah. To help someone cross the road is a sadaqah. It's not all based upon some capitalistic, monetary, Marxist system of class. And we don't have a sadaqah system like this. You can smile at a believer and that's sadaqah. Being with your spouse is a sadaqah. So when you're in trauma, do something nice for somebody. And so this is the perspective. Having a unified perspective. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. He's not just one to bring us out of shirk. One so that we can unify our perspective of this world, which is full of multiplicity and diversity. Okay. And so when we have this unified approach to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who himself is al-wahid, then no matter the situation we're in, no matter the myriad situations that we're in, we see them through one unified telescopic and microscopic lens. One lens, not through multiple lenses. We only see multiple lenses because we are not in tune with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have not understood al-wahid yet. Not. We've understood it at one level, but not at a level that transcends that one and goes deeper into our spirit, which reforms our psychologies and our biologies and our perspectives and our hearts. We've not internalized it. We become like the Quran people who memorize the Quran and it's here, but it hasn't exited those 7 limbs yet. Okay, and that's why our hearts are sick. So we end here, inshallah, and we'll pick up next week, inshallah ta'ala. What I'd like for you to do for homework, yes, there's homework, is read the next chapter, page 24 and 25, which is on law, way, and realization. We'll skim it next week, inshallah, and then we'll go right into repentance, tawbah, inshallah. Yes?
You said that you can love God as much as you want, but it's in fact that is he loving you or not? How do we know, or if he's angry with you or not? Like, how do we know?
You don't know it. Because if you knew it, we would, as human beings, we'd have a feeling of safety and security. We don't. So you have to perpetually strive. You hope and you fear. Hope and fear, those are 2 wings of the belief. No bird can fly with 1 wing. You only soar with 2 wings. Abu Bakr said, if I had 1 foot in paradise, I wouldn't feel secure until I had the 2nd foot. Never, the believer balances between hope and fear. Hope and fear. You hope, Abu Bakr also said, he's profound. This is our teacher in the spiritual path. He said, if it were announced tomorrow that only 1 person would enter paradise from humanity, imagine that. If it were announced from the heavens, only 1 person would enter paradise, Abu Bakr, he said, I would hope that I'm that 1 person. And if it were announced tomorrow that only 1 person was going to the hellfire from humanity, I would have fear that I'm that 1 person. That's the believer. Never feel secure. That's only from shaitan. You have hope that you'll go, and hope and fear that you won't go. And that hope that you go should inform your right conduct. And the fear that you'll go to the hellfire should prevent you from bad conduct. You need both. You need both the carrot and the stick. Does that make sense? Okay. والحمد لله رب العالمين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. Assalamu alaikum. I think this class is being recorded, and there's, I don't know the website, but if, you guys can put the website on, there's a way you can share it. Maybe it's shared and I wasn't informed, so but they sent me the link, and I'm sure it's up, so inshallah, for those that want to see it, it's there. Assalamu alaikum.
It's on YouTube, the channel called Beautiful Streets.